everyone in the world trying to run an education system has the same problem, which is there are not enough good teachers to go around. We started building a superhuman AI math tutor. To succeed, you need some kind of combination of your interests and abilities, and there are more interests and more abilities than we can even imagine. There's kind of like the true believers. There's like the right wing and left wing, like true believers. Maybe that's the wrong dimension, but there are people who actually believe what they say. And then there's like sociopaths, opportunists in the middle. Like Sink Uyghur, I don't know how to pronounce that guy. Yeah, that guy, like the left wing like podcaster.
No,
Sink,
no,
CENK, something like that. Anyways, one of these like he's like hardcore like leftist progressive podcaster. Now he's like trying to get Trump on, and it's like I just feel like there's this like people who realize which way the wind is blowing are like they're switching, and then you have the people who are left on the left who are still like, yeah, no, little boys can become little girls, and they just they haven't realized yet that the power just like
gravity has shifted.
Right. So you don't have to say that the Johnny Come Latelys, right? Like anyone now, anyone like who seems like they're telling the truth, it might just be because they realize that's which way the wind is blowing.
Yes,
that wasn't the case. Definitely not in 2016.
It was funny to see the bellwether people, like you say, who like they're not aware of the concept of integrity. Like they literally, the second the center of gravity shifted, you could tell because they all flipped simultaneously.
Yeah, a couple months ago, I went around like sort of thinking about raising money. So I went around and looked at the VC websites and just screenshot them. I put them all in a folder just so I can remember who had their commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion up front. Like when they come knocking a couple months from now, and all that stuff is going to be scrubbed.
Yep.
And you're not going to be able to find anyone who ever agreed with it.
Right.
Yeah.
Crazy world. Yeah. So how long have you been doing synthesis?
We started it 2020 in June was when we first started. Kind of like we just hacked together like an iPad game over a weekend and then like tried it out. So some of the stuff that my co-founder Josh had done at SpaceX is just these games that are just like more thoughtful. Like they're not shooters or like racing games. Like they're puzzle games, kind of things that you can play with the team. And we put one of those together over a weekend in June 2020, and then weren't really thinking it was going to be a company at that point. We just like, it was COVID, everyone was locked inside. I'd seen what Josh was doing at SpaceX, and always thought like this should be available to more kids. And then right away that kind of got a lot of attention. There were more people who wanted to do it than we could handle. So we incorporated a company in like August 2020. So it's like a little bit over 4 years.
Were you a SpaceX like engineer or employee or?
No, that's the reason I started the company, because I wasn't at SpaceX as an engineer. They had the school that Elon and Josh had created.
For SpaceX employees, right?
Not even, it was like 30 SpaceX employees, a couple thousand at the time in Hawthorne. So even if you were an engineer there, it was very difficult to get your kids in. So my son was 2 at the time. When I first went there. He's 10 now, so it's been like 8 years ago, and I went to the school and saw it. It's like, I want this kind of education for my son. And so I was really excited to see, what I thought was a really great vision of the future of education, see what happens with someone with like Elon's, talent, ingenuity, thinks through education from first principles. And I was really impressed by that. But then I wanted to get my son into it, and, I wasn't a SpaceX engineer. So I thought, well, there's probably a lot of people who will feel the way I do. So let's see if we can use the power of the internet and kind of scale up the best, or scale up at least what's scalable about that school, which is, it's not everything. They had tutors with PhDs from Caltech, like coming by to teach the kids one-on-one from a young age. And, the school itself was located at a rocket factory. So yeah, that's not going to be the typical experience.
Sure.
But, a lot of what they were doing, seemed like, could scale, was like in the curriculum, and the way that you ask kids questions and get them to think about problems that maybe don't necessarily have a right or wrong answer. And the kids, I wasn't sure if it was just the kids who were at SpaceX, because obviously they're be really talented parents. They're going to be really smart kids to begin with. I wasn't sure how much this stuff would appeal to like a wider audience. But it seems to be the case that the kids like to think, and so they're just not challenged to do that at all in school. And so if you give them that opportunity, whether they're the kids of SpaceX engineers or just like regular kids, they seem to like relish this, and it's they seem to take to it like a duck to water. And so it's found a bigger audience than I would have imagined initially.
Sure. What was it about the school that like caught your eye when you went there?
The main thing was
your background education? I guess I should ask that first.
I was at a company called Class Dojo. I joined there as the first engineer. Class Dojo was like a messaging app. Still is. Really successful messaging app where teachers can message the parents of their kids in like K through 8 mostly. I joined it as one of the first employees and the first full-time engineer, and scaled it up through like $1 billion in value and like 30 million monthly active users. And so I was my kind of point of view there was like, we have this network that reaches all these people. Let's go look for ideas that we can kind of like spread through the network. And that's what led me to SpaceX and the school that Josh had created. So I'd been kind of around and seen, felt like I kind of seen everything in education. I actually wasn't that excited to go down to Elon's school because I was like, he's how much is it really going to be different from all the other things I've seen? Sure. And I'd just seen so many things that were like supposedly innovative that I thought were just like mostly the same old thing. Yeah. And that school was like just totally different. Like,
what was the special sauce there?
I mean, it was definitely the kids were part of it, right? So just having that group of kids that were like really smart, having a small school. And then a lot of it was Josh, who's my co-founder now, who's the teacher who ran it. He was like totally different. He was like very, very intense, like probably the closest thing you'd get to like if Elon was like a teacher, like in terms of just how serious he was about it, how maniacal he was about the curriculum. Yeah. And mostly what he was doing is he'd go meet with Elon at his house on Sundays usually, and like give him the update on the school. And Elon would be on calls or whatever beforehand, and he'd kind of wait in the waiting room. So you get to listen to him like solving problems with his team on the weekends. And he's thinking like, how do I get the kids thinking in a way that they can contribute to solving problems in this way? So he was just always coming up with new curriculum. Like one of the things that was that struck me as interesting was Elon was working on moving the company from LA to Texas at the time. And so he just asked the kids, Josh just asked the kids like, okay, we're going to move the company to Texas. How do you go about doing that? Like think through that, and just give them a bunch of stuff to read and think through, and then have them start coming up with their own solutions. And so they really like that just kind of like creative problem solving. But then, Josh kind of realized that at the end of that, you like hand in a report, and then the teacher is like, okay, like that's good or that's bad, but there's no like reality. Like when the people at SpaceX are doing it, they actually have to deal with the reality of it. Right. And so he wanted some kind of feedback from the environment that wasn't coming through him. And that's when he created these, what became the synthesis class, and which is where we get our name, which is he'd create these kind of games that are, could call them like thinking games for lack of a better term. They're like simulations. You work with a team, you play against the other teams in your class, and you try to see who can figure out this problem the fastest. And so that achieves, it's exciting to like play a game, and you get the feedback now that's coming from, from the environment and not from a teacher just kind of like subjectively judging whether it worked out or not.
So it's more like, did you win? Did you achieve the right outcomes rather than did you get the right answer? Like, false. And there's just, true or false.
Yeah, exactly. And so part of why that's different from like a normal kind of like a strategy game or something like that is, Josh's always coming up with new games, and we're still doing this at Synthesis now, because I don't know if you guys are big gamers, but like to me, the exciting part, the best part of a game is figuring out a new game and how it works. All right. And that's like this, what you're always doing is like an entrepreneur is like, you've got some new problem, some new game to figure out, and you've got to kind of get the lay of the land and how it works. But then, you kind of like solve the bottleneck, and the part of like video games and that is kind of less interesting is where you kind of figure out how it works. And then you just need to like grind and like build your intuition for that particular game, if that makes sense, right? Like if you, like it's interesting for the sports analogy, like it's interesting to figure out like how basketball works and what are like kind of the principles and fundamentals. Less interesting to go take like 1,000 shots a day for like 10 years and try to be a professional to it, right? And there are games like that in life where you just need that like deep experience. But, you know, for the most interesting things, you know, if you look at what Elon's doing, what's he really good at is constantly going to new games and like figuring them out, kind of, you know, figuring out very quickly like what is important. And so that's the kind of practice. We just want to create an environment where kids can get that kind of practice with other kids who are taking it seriously, because, you know, that's the best, you know, training ground for a world where we can't simply, you know, there's no analogy in the real, like in the wider world of just like doing a lot of practice like you can for basketball, right? Like whatever you guys are doing now with the fund and like podcast just didn't exist, right? But
just do it.
But in the future, there will be novel problems to figure out with people, and that will be a skill that will be applicable, you know, no matter what happens in the future. And so that we feel like is like the fundamental, you know, skill that we're trying to get kids through the synthesis games.
Yeah, it seems that we've mutual friend of all of us here, Ryan Dell. We've talked to him about this too, but I'm curious your take. How did we get to education being so sort of intuitive? In my mind, it's sort of intuitively the opposite of what it should be, like especially for kids. I remember just both Josh and I were homeschooled for, I think, for most of our you know, our school career or whatever, and I didn't think about it in these terms at the time, but it was certainly kind of red pilling to me just growing up as a homeschool kid. And like we worked really hard, we learned a lot of fun things, but we also had time to do and build and do all sorts of other things. And then talking to my friends who I used to go to the same school as them, and my parents pulled us out, and then they were essentially from an early age this cubicle drones, you know, and just sitting there, you can't move, you can't talk, you can't say, you just, I was like,
that's their patterns of life that they started with. Like, I don't know if you guys did this for us.
Like, their soul is just being shaped in that way. Not when they're 20 at McKinsey, when they're 5.
When they're 5. And like we did, our week started on Thursday. That was our co-op day with the other kids. But if you got you had your work for the week, if you got it done sooner than that, then you could have like 3 days off or whatever. You get like, if you worked harder or faster, then you could get more versus just being stuck in a seat, which is
our COO at Synthesis had a similar experience. He was did Montessori school like K through 8, and he still like talks about that. Like, I could just go. They had work for you to do, but if you got it done, then you could just play. So he's like, I would rush to school, get my work done first thing, and then I'd have like hours to like play with cars or wherever it was when he was a little kid.
Exactly.
Yeah. So how did it get that way? I mean, that's obviously like really complex question. Part of it is definitely just the scale. What you're trying to do things at scale, and so you've got like these, you know, tests that kind of measure, and it's not like all bad. I actually think that's like, if you look at the history of education in America, it used to be just much less, right? And I think at some point moms, you know, started going to work more, and then you need the kids to be looked after for, you know, 8 hours a day or 9 hours a day, and you actually there's only very little of like the academics that you can do, right? Like my personal opinion is about like an hour a day is for like a, you know, K through 8, which is where kids actually learn. By the way, if you look at the difference in you know what kids learn from like 9th grade to 12th, it's like nothing, right? You learn how to read, you learn mathematics, you learn these things that you retain, you know, a great deal when you're in like kindergarten through 8th grade. Once you're like in high school, the kids actually learn very little. They don't improve very much on like the core skills at all.
Interesting.
And so there's just not that much to do. But then you have a whole lot of time. And, you know, when you're homeschooled or you have like a small Montessori school, there's all these different, you know, kind of micro school, like Ryan at Primer is doing something there where you run it at a small scale with very few students and great people. And yeah, you can come up with a million things to do with your time that are interesting. And that's what I do with my kids when they homeschool. Like, we're not doing what looks like school for like hours and hours every day. It's more like an hour. And that's, I think, about the max that like your brain can do for most kids. And so I think they there's like the seed of a good idea, and then it's like, well, what if we, have to keep kids for 5 days a week and for 8 hours a day? You just fill up the time, right? And that's I don't know if you guys saw the Austen's post recently that went pretty viral on X about like just getting a 6-year-old to speed run math. So he's using the synthesis tutor, the superhuman AI tutor product we have, and he's like, we're just gonna do all the K-5 math in like a couple months, and like he's maybe a little optimistic, but not by much, right? Like you can knock out these like the core kind of academics, the things that like everybody ought to know and have some familiarity with, like what Elon calls the core of the semantic tree of knowledge, right? Like which there is such a thing. You want to give your kids exposure to that and get them to learn the basics there, but it just doesn't take very much time. And then like when you're talking about being homeschooled, you get to explore all these different interests. Like you find like your kind of things that you're like autistically interested in, right, which should be like the bulk of the time, right? Is just pursuing what you're interested in. But you do need that thin slice. And I think when you look at things at scale, it's like the best these big systems can do is just to like take the same thing that worked on a small scale and just scale it up, take way more time.
What do you think is the ideal? If money was no object, you could create the perfect education. What does that look like?
I think like for K through like 8 or so, like I think like homeschooling with a mother who's intelligent is like a pretty good thing. Maybe what Elon is doing, where he's taking little X around with him.
Yeah, through Congress or whatever.
I don't know. Yeah. I think that's good. I think the more time kids can. This is not a novel idea for me or anything, but the more kids can spend time, with you doing like actual adult life, is good. And if you look at, I think Tolkien was homeschooled by his mother, who was a linguist, right? C.S. Lewis was homeschooled. Thomas Edison was homeschooled by his mom, who's a teacher or something. I think if you have like intelligent mother, then I think that's like kind of obviously the best. Apart from that, I think what Elon did was maybe the next best thing, where you get a couple like really, really smart teachers and who can be creative and kind of adapt the curriculum to the kids. But these kind of things, they don't scale. Like by necessity, they don't scale. Because a lot of it is just adapting to whatever the kids are interested in. And so it's, a lot of it just won't scale. And so I don't think there is like an ideal, because every community different, all the kids are different. Everybody shouldn't be doing the same thing. That's what we live in, like a free society. We're not the Prussians, like where our school model is literally based on like the Prussian, it's like a military thing. And I think it's been adapted a lot since then as well. But that core of it is like, you kind of march people in lockstep and treat them like everybody's the same. But we have this, what David Deutsch calls like a dynamic civilization, dynamic society. So we really want people to be creative. I think like the main thing with school is like, just don't crush their creativity. Like this is the main thing for homeschooling my kids. I don't know what your parents' goals were, but like mine was like, I just don't want their spirit to be crushed the way like I felt like mine was. And, obviously you could say like, well, I turned out okay. I'm like, yeah, but it was torture. Like school was literally felt like torture to me. So I don't want to torture my kids and then just be like, well, yeah, but they turn out like, okay. I wanted, first and foremost to not torture them. And secondly, avoid this, if there are like these long-term effects of it, like crushing your spirit and creativity, let's avoid that.
What was your experience like in school?
I just ignored everything and like read a book under my desk. That's what I did.
Is it public, private?
It was public. It was public back though. It was a little, it was not in California. Like like public school is like a totally different thing. Mine was like a small town, like 35,000 people, rich kids and poor kids, and we all went to school together. And it wasn't, it wasn't a particularly bad school. It was just like by the time I got to, 3rd or 4th grade, it just felt like not really like what am I doing here? Not really learning anything. I like to be with other kids and play sports and those kind of things that you got in school. But the learning, I just would ignore whatever the teacher was doing and read a book. Yeah, I thank God that I wasn't in a private school where it was academically challenging, because I could just read a book all day. Right. I could read whatever I wanted. Yeah. And so I feel like if you gave me like, if the schoolwork was more overbearing, then I wouldn't have had time to like develop my own personality and interests. So thankful for that.
Yeah. But I've told the story in maybe another one of our episodes, but so we were homeschooled. One of the tools that my parents used was online classical Christian school to supplement for some of the topics. And my brother in particular, he's extremely creative with physical objects. He got into mostly through reading.
He's a shape rotator.
Blacksmith. Yeah, exactly. He got into blacksmithing and wanted to forge his own chainmail and stuff. And my parents would give him tools and scrap steel and metal and all sorts of things. But one of the things I remember my mom telling the story later when I was in college, or maybe even already after college, kind of reflecting back on that period of time and talking about how so my brother would be. This was pre-webcams becoming ubiquitous. The online classes were only voice, and so my brother would log into his online class and would be listening to the lecture, and the teacher would call on him, and all the time because there's no webcam, he would be like, making chainmail or sharpening a knife or making stuff out of leather, and he would still be paying attention, and the teacher would call him, he would put his stuff down, answer the question perfectly, and then go back to his, with a knife or whatever. Yeah. And my mom reflecting on that was saying, like, my brother would have been just totally crushed. In a regular school, it's like, you can't move. Yeah. Eyes to the front.
Butts and seats.
Yeah, exactly. Don't even wiggle your toes because that's bad. Yeah. Whereas there, he was able to actually fully participate in both the lecture and the class. Yeah, yeah. But also then just like explore this entirely other side that would have been seen as whatever, dangerous at ADHD or something silly like that.
Yeah, ADHD was a big that was how I convinced my wife to homeschool, 'cause she was just not into it initially. But our firstborn was just like, I remember we had this video of her. She sent me a video one day when I was at work and he was little. She went to like a mommy and me music class with him. And so it's all these moms sitting around in a circle and the kids are sitting on their lap, like banging on drums or whatever, some like musical stuff. And then there's one kid that's running around the circle screaming. That's my son. I was like, look, you put him in school, they're going to drug him on day one. Oh, yeah. Like Austen, Allred posted about this week. You can see his son using our math tutor. And it's like, it's asking him questions and to answer. And he's just like moving all around and talking, right? And he's like answering the questions right at that. But like, if you're in school, it's like you're being disruptive to the other students. Yeah. So, you can't do that. It's really interesting. I think school is like, my daughter, now having a daughter, this is like totally different. She would be fine. Yes. She'd be totally fine. Because for the boys, I think they're generalizing, but I think by and large they're like the raptors in Jurassic Park, where they like hit the fence, and they'll just keep testing the fence to see the boundaries of their reality. And I think that's the way little boys are just kind of wired to do that. And the girls are like, she wants to learn this stuff because we want her to learn the stuff, and that's sufficient, whereas the boys, it's like if they're not interested in it, it's really difficult. So I only have like my kids to go on that I see up close like that, but it seems like just totally different. I think school's particularly hostile to like the high energy boys who are also like the people who are, have disproportionate effect, like moving civilization forward. Right. And so I feel like we're living there's obviously a lot of problems with our education system, but we're kind of living through, I feel like it did get really bad in like 70s and 80s. And we're kind of living with like the
results of that.
Grew up through that now, and it'll take a while to fix it, but I'm optimistic because I think people who have the means now, I see this more and more. There's like these elite homeschoolers now where they're pulling their kids out not because they're necessarily like anti-vaxxers or extremely religious or something like that, where they're just like, the school is not good enough, it's going to crush my kids' spirits, and I want my kids to be successful. And so I think there's on the net downside of that, there's going to be a brain drain from public and private schools, where you're going to have like the leftovers are going to, it's going to be even worse of an environment. But the plus side is I think the elites are increasingly pulling their kids out, and that's a good thing.
And more people will have access to do something different, like with synthesis. Like it's not going to be necessarily a cost prohibitive thing to get that education.
Absolutely. I mean, it creates a market, right? Like the market, I think what we're doing at synthesis, like you couldn't have done it, 5 years ago, like absolutely not even from like technological standpoint, with where AI is like tremendously helpful, but just culturally, like people were kind of like, the schools are fine, and that's not the case now. And it's still, I think, it's still really early. Like if you look on Twitter, it's like, everybody kind of recognizes the problems of school, but if you go just talk to like regular people who aren't on Twitter all the time, it's not filtered through yet. But it is increasing. I've seen it just around here in my area. We've had several friends now pull their kids out of public or private schools and put them in like our homeschool co-op, and it's always the same kind of, it's everyone kind of has their different reasons, but they're just like looking at it like, man, something is not working for my kid. And now my kids are in like sports with other kids. And so it kind of goes viral with the kids, where they're like asking my kids about their schedule. And my kids are like, we wake up kind of whenever we wake up, we play soccer for a little bit, then we do like an hour of work. And the other kids are like, what? Like, I want to do that.
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
So they're pushing their parents to do it. So it's it's a good thing. And with the technology advancing and more people doing it, you're less of a weirdo. I don't know what it was like for you growing up with your family, but it was, when I was a kid, it was like there were homeschoolers, but they were weirdos because they were alone, right? Whereas my kids aren't alone. Like they get plenty of time like socializing with other kids because there's lots of other homeschoolers in the area.
Right. So going back to synthesis, the product, when you launched in 2020, summer 2020 is when you started the company.
Yeah.
This is pre like Gen AI really even appearing on the map.
Yeah.
It's being cooked, but not released.
Yeah.
So what was the original product and vision for synthesis? And then I assume at some point it evolved and changed.
Yeah, totally. So we started with, there was the synthesis class at the SpaceX school was basically this like collaborative, games. So we launched initially with that. There were games, there's a community of other kids to play with, and it was overseen by a teacher who was, they like kind of use the games to like teach you, concepts and ideas. So one of the initial ones, a game called Constellation, where you're kind of making these networks of stars. And so the teachers will like teach you a little bit about like how network effects work and network structures and stuff like that. And we did quite well with that. We got to, we were doing like $1 million a month in revenue, at some point. But it's, about 18 months in, that was when the AI kind of started to come on the scene, and that business wasn't super scalable. Like we were at 10 million a year, we couldn't see how we get it to 100 million because having the teachers was like a much bigger challenge even than we'd anticipated. And so we kind of pivoted that business where we kept the games and the community of kids, but more of the moderation now is done by AI. So we still have like adults to keep the make sure that it's civil. The main thing that like the kids get out of this versus like Fortnite or Roblox or something like that is if you listen in on the conversations they're having, that are like way more sophisticated. So if I listen to my son play Fortnite, it's all like, bro, this is good.
Yeah.
When I listen to play synthesis, it's like, well, if we move here, I don't think that really solves the bottleneck. So I think we need to devote more resources to this problem instead. And it just sounds more like
Napoleonian.
That's the same kid, the same 10-year-old. And so,
amazing.
His mom and I like want him to have more of that experience. And so we still have adults that are there, but they're far more scalable now. We use kind of AI to like triage. So we'll still bring adults in because you don't want the kids to get, you don't want it to devolve into the like bro goated kind of thing or that sort of thing. So we pivoted that one. And that's still that product now is profitable. It's still going well. It's like doubled in revenue this year. But we also at the same time we were pivoting that, we started building a superhuman AI math tutor, which we launched about a year ago. and which is also taking off. It's been mostly all the revenue has been consumer, straight to consumer so far, but we're also starting to field a lot of inquiries from schools and a couple national governments that are looking to roll it out to like their entire country. So we're piloting with a couple different governments right now. That's awesome. Which is something I said like a year and a half ago when we first started getting the kind of proof that this was working with kids. And I was telling investors about this, trying to raise money. I was like, we'll go to consumer, then we'll go to like schools and institutions, and then it's going to be like national governments. I just got literally laughed out of the room. No one really believed that was going to happen. I actually thought it would be, a couple more years before we got to that stage. But, everyone in the world trying to run an education system has the same problem, which is there are not enough there are not enough good teachers to go around, and actually the best way to learn is with a one-on-one tutor. So that's we talked about, like the homeschool mom being like the best way, like the second best way. What the elites, like the royalty, would do is they hire somebody like Philip of Macedon hired Aristotle to tutor Alexander. And so that's kind of the second best way, but there's never enough Aristotles to go around. And, every education system in the world is dealing with that. And, so far there's no software that's delivered, but I think we have the thing that will deliver, that will actually be superior to having a human teach you in math, science, anything that's like technical and there's an objective reality. Like, I think we pretty much have that cracked.
Yeah. So I was going to ask about the subjects that the tutor, teaches. I was talking to somebody ahead of coming to the pod and told him that we were going to chat with you, and he was asking about why those subjects and not or maybe at some point humanities will be included. And then if so, everybody that's used ChatGPT or Claude or any of those knows that these models are both very, very confident and can be very confidently wrong. And so when a teacher is when a student is asking an AI tutor a question, is there a danger that the AI tutor is very, very confidently wrong about the answer that brings forth?
With ours, no. We've been able to solve that problem, and without going too much into the IP of exactly how we do it. There's certain problems where LLMs are helpful, and then there's certain problems where they're not, and so you just have to. I think this idea, I think this is starting to go away. Where I had this again when I was talking to investors like a year ago, like maybe ChatGPT will just be, that's the AI tutor. I think like that.
Like why synthesis? Just ChatGPT will wipe you off the face of the earth.
And I think I don't have to answer that question anymore. I never had to answer it from teachers or people who actually have seen the way these products work. Right? There's a couple problems. One is the hallucination problem, which is hard to fix. Two is like the text is not such a great medium for learning a lot of things, right? The same. I always thought like video games and simulations are like if you look at the early things, like people like Seymour Papert who worked at the MIT Media Lab back in like the 80s, and created the Mindstorms, like
the Legos.
Lego Mindstorms.
Yes.
There was this great promise of computers that that you can there's something that you can interact with, right? And like a reality, like a simulacrum of reality.
Right.
And what kind of happened with ed tech, 1.0, is like we just took the lectures and like worksheets, and then we put those on the internet, and that's what like most of the products are, and that doesn't really work. And when we started the company, this is true of both the synthesis games and the tutor. You can create these simulations, right? So our tutor is not like talking to you about fractions. It's giving you like these simulations, and then the tutor can see what's going on. So there's the way we teach fractions, for example, is like we give you this big square and we're like, why don't you hit it with a hammer? And then you hit it with a hammer and it breaks up into a couple pieces. And then the tutor kind of asks you like, well, what happened there, right? And it has like a conversation about this simulation. So it's not just text, which is another problem that the LLMs have.
Interesting.
So the first one is the hallucination. The second one is text is not the ideal medium. And the third one is when if you imagine Aristotle tutoring Alexander, he is not just answering Alexander's questions. Like there's a sense where, Aristotle would be driving that, right? Because you don't want to just rely on the kid to figure out what's important, right? You want to be driving it to some extent. Sure. And so that's the third one, where the LLMs, they do not yet ask you questions, so they can answer your questions like same as Google, and maybe in a little bit more interesting way. But there's nothing yet where you can just say to the LLM like, hey, teach my kid math, and it will come in and go, okay, so what do you know already? Let me just figure this out. That all takes a lot of work and scaffolding to get right.
Yeah. I mean, I remember some of the first video games I played where like Age of Empires and those kinds of games that were. I don't blame them. It was a novel medium for everybody, but to my parents' minds, that was the same as like just a first-person shooter.
Yeah.
And now looking back, reflecting on it as I have my own kids and thinking about like how am I going to introduce screens in games, you couldn't. Yeah, there's screens, like it's a game, a video game, but it's almost it's very, very hard to compare the two in my mind, and the structure and the outcomes and how you interact with the entire world that's being presented to you in a Age of Empires, Civilization, or a real-time strategy game versus just like a Fortnite type of a snack, a snack of a game.
Yes. It's totally different. That's the whole screen time thing is really interesting. One thing I like to mention when this comes up is like there was a previous moral panic about like paper time. Right, like when novels came out, like the adults were freaking out, like the kids are spending all these time in novels. This is terrible, right? And it's I think there are always like trade-offs when new mediums come around, but I sort of suspect like now we force kids to read novels in school against their will, right? And like I bet this goes on long enough. Eventually, it's going to be like kids are forced to play video games in school, right? Like so that's one thing where I kind of like when people ask me about the screen time thing, it's like we're probably off base about that. And then the other one is like you mentioned, the screen time is not all created equal. Like there's you can use the screen to write a memo and raise millions of dollars or get customers for your company, or you can use a screen to just like doom scroll, right? So it's just computers are a medium. They haven't been used very well for education yet. I think like at least a huge part of that reason is that the market is like in selling the things to schools, so there's no kind of like pressure to create like a great consumer experience. You don't sell it to consumers, you sell it to like superintendent of a school district. But again, I think that's changing, and like markets are starting to open up, and I think there'll be a bright future ahead. I think we'll like games like Age of Empires are already, I think, like great educational tools on their own rights. I think that'll be increasingly recognized as such, particularly people like Elon, famously play a lot of video games. The founder of Shopify, Toby is also like a big gamer and says like, I learned CEO skills from playing video games, which I think is totally true.
Totally. Do you see VR playing a role there in some?
No, I don't think so. And I think the reason is I think like I don't know. Here's kind of like an anecdote to highlight this. My son was playing Fortnite yesterday. He's just started playing Fortnite. He's 10. And I was like watching him play Fortnite. And I was like, man, it's really cool. There's good graphics. You get to like fly through the air a little bit, and you have all these weapons and stuff. And then we had to take a break for dinner. And then after dinner, I was like, I'm going to show you this game I played when I was a kid on the NES called Lolo's Adventures, which has like 16-bit graphics, and it's like a puzzle game. And both my boys are just like glued to that game for like an hour, right? Even though the graphics are completely unrealistic, the game is like so simple, but you're still you get drawn into this simulated world, even though it's on a flat screen and the graphics are not super important. So I see the VR will have, of course, like niche use cases, but I think, I just think it's like fundamentally unimportant. I think it's sort of like having better CGI in movies. Like, does that make better movies? Like, well, it makes things a little bit different, but if you watch the old movies, it's like I don't know that you would prefer the modern CGI kind of stuff to the old stuff. right? And are the animatronic dinosaurs in Jurassic Park better than the modern Godzilla movie? Like, yeah, I think it's not clear CGI has made things like super advanced, right? Maybe it's made them cheaper, but hasn't achieved the effect.
Yeah, it's cheaper to produce, but on the consumer end, it's the same at best, or if not worse.
Yeah, exactly.
In other ways.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. Like the fundamentals are unrelated to that. So, I think maybe like people always use. I always find this interesting when people use the same example. Everybody uses the same example. It's like surgery, right? It's like you could train for surgery in VR. It's like, well, then if it's like, we're 10 years into this and there's no second example, then that's probably a bad sign.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
What do you think about going back to mediums? What do you think about like reading versus listening? I guess you guys get a different aspect of that with visuals versus just the written math, but how do you think that plays in, and how do you train your kids around that?
Yeah, so our tutor both prints the words and reads them to you.
Okay.
And if you're for the older students, they'll turn off the reading out loud to them. It's not necessary, but a lot of people like that.
Yeah.
Especially the younger kids, like it helps them kind of learn to read, to have the words and the reading out loud, and that kind of makes it feel more personal as well. I got into this argument with someone, not just a little discussion on X the other day about audiobooks. I think there's a lot of, I always think like in education, there are always like purists, and people do this with like handwriting, and they do this with like, you have to read the physical books. And I just like, I don't think any of that is true. I think like audiobooks are great. I read a lot of audiobooks. I don't notice a difference. I mean, of course there are differences in the medium. Like you can skip around in a paper book, a lot easier and go back and that sort of thing. But like for a novel, I think like audiobook is pretty much fine. Maybe it depends on the person as well. Like maybe some people can process it, just fine when they're going for a run and listening to it. And maybe some people, need to sit down. But I think I think basically the fundamental principle in education is you have to think. Right. So that's how you create new knowledge in your own mind. Like we can't pass knowledge directly as people, right? If I give you some idea, you have to create your own meaning for that idea for it to go in your brain. And it's going to be a little different. It's not going to be an exact copy. And that's the fundamental principle of learning. So I think what our tutor does really well as kind of like a new medium is, the tutor, the story kind of unfolds with you and it gets you to pay attention. And by paying attention, it's getting you to recreate the knowledge in your own mind. And that has to be done whether you get it from books or audiobooks or movies or whatever. You have to do that thinking. And so, I think we've got something really interesting here where it's a medium that, reliably produces more thinking in the students, but it's still, there's that fundamental principle that needs to be upheld. There's no way yet to like, I don't know if you guys know, like, if you know the Baby Einstein, you're too young. Baby Einstein was like, the idea is like you could play, audio to your baby and they would absorb it and they get smarter, but that doesn't appear to have worked. I think the company got sued out of existence. There's just no basis for it. You have to create knowledge in your own mind by thinking.
Right.
That was just like by osmosis. You put him near a speaker that's playing Beethoven.
Was that like
it was great? Yeah, it'd be great. But yeah, unfortunately, just not how anything works.
It's way queer.
Mozart makes babies smarter.
Yes.
Yeah.
So one of the things that this is outside of synthesis, but you and I have talked about, or rather, you've told me about, is so with your kids, you do synthesis, homeschool. One of the big deals for you and your kids is sports, right? Like soccer.
Yeah.
So. You should talk about that because that's like how that fits into your model of education. Because you have like they're regimented, you train them, they start with like, not knowing anything, and then they can do all sorts of cool things.
Man, I get more and more white-pilled on sports the more my kids play.
Sure.
It's obviously a big part of their social lives as well. Being homeschooled, just getting to play sports with other kids is great.
Did you grow up playing sports?
I played, I played basketball until high school, played on the high school team, and I played soccer through all the way through high school. and played baseball like in little league, and never played football, but yeah, I think sports are great, and really, I think the controversial for like a nerd to say this, but like I think America is right to have, like, people will complain about the crazy focus that American families have on sports, but I think they're by and large correct to do so. Like, I think sports are probably on equal footing with academics in terms of importance. I would not have said that before I had kids. I wouldn't have expected that at all. But I think it's things people say, like, it gives you something to strive toward. It gives you like an objective reality. You learn to deal with failure, right? In a pretty objective way if you're not as good at the game. And you learn, one of the things with my kids is like, they learn how to work hard and to see how that plays out in life. And I think that's, you can get that through, things like playing musical instruments and other things as well. But like, if your kids gravitate towards sports, I don't think that's anything to worry about. I think, America is maybe gets the sports thing more right. Maybe this is why America is like so inventive and has been so successful, is because the importance of playing, different team sports. Maybe something to that.
Yeah.
I think people take it too far, and
Sure.
I think it's they're the people who like really want to push their kids to be professional athletes, but you always have that. But I think by and large, they're a great thing. Yeah. The recent kind of thing I was looking at with my kids was I have them trained. They want to play soccer, so I taught them how to do keepy uppy. I've shared this on X. So you like juggle the ball, like bounce it up with just your feet. And this has been such a white pill for me. They've been doing it now about 10 months, and they started with the ball would bounce between each one, and they could do like 5 of those like 10 months ago, to where now they both do over 100 with like a miniature ball, right? It's like about, maybe 4 tennis balls worth, which is like crazy. And we didn't do anything crazy at all. Like, I try to stick to a pretty consistent schedule where they do it before school.
Yeah.
And it's like 15 minutes. And I think it really helps. There's 2 of them. So if one of them gets higher, then the other one kind of gets mad and like wants to beat their score, and just kept track of it on a graph. And it's like, it's wild. You just don't see any improvement for like a month. And then they make these jumps, and it's like just through consistency and like showing up. And so I think that's like a really good lesson, right? Like, it actually amazing. Makes me, I was thinking about the other day, it kind of upset me because I'm thinking, I could have taught them like so much more than I have. Like, they're 10 and 8 now, and I'm like, I mean, they could be speaking like 6 different languages by now and playing a bunch of different musical instruments if we'd taken this principle of just do like 15 minutes of focused work on this thing consistently. Because being able to do that with your feet with a soccer ball is like a pretty wild level to be at. Like, I played my whole life, and they're like better than me now just through the consistent effort. Yeah. So that's I don't know. I find it just, I think it's important for boys to figure out how to win at something. I think, not everybody's going to be the best basketball or football or baseball player or whatever, but there's a bunch of different games. And I think, like, if you have boys, like, they should, whether it's like blacksmithing or whatever, like, I think every man, it's like important for you to have something that you can like teach to other men. And I think everybody can have that thing where they excel in that. And men are kind of funny that way. Like, they like it. Like, my boys are really good soccer players, and like all the other kids like them. So they just have like instant friends whenever they go play, because everybody's like, oh, wow, like you're amazing. And men are kind of like that. When someone's better at something than you, it's like we all are with Elon. You're not like probably envious or resentful or Elon for being, superior to you. Like, I'm not, right? I'm just like, if I'd met him, I'd be like, wow, this is, it feels good to be around that kind of confidence. And so that was like part of my initial motivation. Like, well, if soccer's going to be your thing, like, let's get so good at it that it's like, shocking to other people. And we have that ability to practice more because they're at home school. So they usually wake up and they train for like 45 minutes or an hour. I do like pretty, intense, like physical workouts, which just helps with the schooling, right? Then when I'm like, hey, let's go read and do some math work. Yeah. Okay. We do sleds. We do a lot of like like jumping, like trying to like broad jump, or like see how far you can hop on one foot with like, 6 hops on one foot, like agility kind of stuff. And so, yeah, they're much faster and like more athletic than I was, which is, just, I don't know. I think it's like something you should see what your body is capable of,
for
right?
sure.
And it's soccer for them, but like they have a friend who it's gymnastics for him. And I think there's a million different things that you could do, but something you should do to like push yourself and figure out what your capabilities are. And it creates this nice analogy because they're so interested in the sports that I can be like, look, we apply the same thing to like learning math or any of the things that like I kind of want you to do that maybe you're less interested in your own right. But you can see that you will build these compounding skills if you just show up every day. So I think that's like I think everybody should try something like that with their kids. Like do something like 15 minutes a day that's hard, where you just show up and just do that with them for a year. And like I can see that like changes my kids' brains, right? It changes your idea of what you're capable of when you see consistent effort pay off like that.
Yeah. And keepy uppy is like the perfect incarnation. Like for the guy mind, like if I do this thing and I just get a little better, I can get to 10, 20, 50.
Yeah. It's hard too. It's like they're in tears.
Yeah.
Like especially
I'm never gonna do it, Dad. Yeah, sure.
That's another. So I made like a whole like thread about this, but like they would have quit in the first. They won't quit now. Like if I don't push them to do it, they'll do it because they've seen it work. But in the first like 30 days or so, when they're not able to do it at all,
frustrating.
Like they would quit. They were like in tears a lot of times, and because it is just like extremely frustrating. A lot of times you just feel like you're not getting better at it. Yeah, and it's like, I'm not ever going to be able to do this thing. But then, like 30 days in, it's like, they don't need any encouragement anymore. And then now other people see them, like one of them had they had a contest on their team, and like the next best was like 14 and he did like 130. It's just like, and he's just younger. He's like a year younger than the other kids on the team. Yeah. So it's like, okay, now once you get good at something, kids don't need that much encouragement. Right. This is just, I think, like a general principle for like, you asked about the ideal education. There is this like core knowledge. You want everybody to kind of understand math, understand a little bit about economics and how markets work and these sorts of things. But then you want to spend this time finding like your blacksmithing, whatever you're going to be good at and interested in. Like there's infinite number of games in the world. There's new games being invented every day that we don't even know. Like podcasting is like a totally new game. And then, now people take podcasts and they pair it with investing or something like that. Right. Just go find those things and like figure out. That's how we should be using youth. So you still have to have like what we traditionally call education, but it's maybe an hour a day, maybe not 8 hours a day.
Yeah. I always think of the founder of IKEA. He wrote a really good handbook that's pretty short that he gave out to people. But one of his things for IKEA was there always has to be one thing in the store that's just stupidly priced. That's like an insanely good deal that people would like freak out over and be like, this is insane. So it's like IKEA is like well priced, but if the whole store was just like, oh, this whole store is like nice and like reasonable, then it's boring. Yeah. Like, so you gotta mix in those spikes in that get people excited. And it feels like the same way with what you're talking about. Like find a couple things or one thing that can be a big spike, and that's going to make a big difference.
Yeah. Then everybody's interesting. This is maybe the big thing with school. It's like it makes everybody kind of uninteresting because your years where you could get interested in things, it's like everybody has you read the same books, do the same kind of clubs and same kind of activities. And we want, that was like the kind of, I always love this example from David Deutsch, the physicist, wrote Beginning of Infinity. You contrast like Spartan society with Athenian. So in Sparta, everybody does the same thing, right? Everybody, they grow up, they go to the same like warrior school, and they're all the same, right? And Sparta lasted a brief period of time and then flamed out. Whereas Athens is like that's the foundation of civilization today, right? It's different. There's creativity, it's dynamic. There are all these different things you can do. So it's not, we have a school system that is built for a static society where we can kind of predict what people are going to do. We want everybody to do the same thing, and we're just trying to see like who excels at it. And in a dynamic civilization, like anything is possible. So you want to at least get your kids out of that static system so they can explore and find what's interesting.
It seems like that system just purely on first principles, it just can't be long-term sustained. The static like education system, but certainly not in the age of AI and even crypto and like the debureaucratization of like Doge does what it's supposed to do. And at least it seems to me like that system can grow as bureaucracy grows in a way, because you're just creating the mini bureaucrats. Bureaucrats are creating mini bureaucrats to put in bureaucratic sort of, phony positions.
Yeah.
Whereas if most of that heuristic, that framework of the reality just disappears, it's either just pure, like, just be honest, it's daycare on the one hand, or you're better off reading a little bit a day and being in the woods and building forts.
There's definitely
seems like we're at crossroads is kind of what I'm saying.
Yes,
we're getting close. I don't know.
Maybe one white pill is like the system as it exists now is not that old. It's like 100 years old. And again, when it was 100 years ago, the school days were much shorter. So it took, quite a while, maybe by like the 30s and 40s, where it was like every kid's in school for, through the 12th grade and for so many hours each day. So it's historically kind of a novelty. So probably won't last like another 100 years. I think the black pill is like, it has survived a lot of technological change already, the system as it is. So is AI going to be the thing that changes it? I don't know. We hope so. Like with what we're making with the tutor, one of our thesis about how this will create change is the schools are graded on how well they teach math. And if we don't have yet as a society have like that accessible superhuman tutor where it's so good that if you put kids on it, then it's like, what's the point of all the math classes that we're doing? And I think the synthesis tutor is that thing where we're running pilots now, but I think what we're going to find from the pilots, just based on my observations, are there's no point in even keeping up the charade that we're teaching math in schools. You can just put kids on this and it will do the job entirely. And that's kind of like half of what the schools are graded on. And so maybe that is like enough of a change where it just makes people realize like what we're doing is superfluous. And I don't know. The other point on the kind of like professional managerial class, like proliferation, we have that at all levels. So what when they talk about this at Doge, if you look at education funding, it's 13% federal for K-12, and the remainder, 87%, is split between state and local governments, and all of it is like administrative bloat, right? Very little of this is actually getting the teachers and getting their families. And so the fact that you have that at all levels, it probably indicates like the Doge is not going to be able to fix it alone. There's going to have to be some larger cultural awareness where we kind of take back the civilization from the bureaucrats, and maybe the Doge is like the first kind of, the fact that is a meme now, right? Maybe that will proliferate, but I don't think we should have any illusions that this stuff can be fixed at federal level. It's at all the levels. So it's something like culturally, and it was totally rational for parents, like when I was growing up, when you guys were growing up, to just say like, get your good grades and then go to the college, and then you'll get a paper pushing bureaucratic job that contributes nothing to civilization, because at least you'll get paid the money. But that kind of expanded at the federal level for so long, maybe with the Doge kind of decreasing that and showing what can be done with fewer people, maybe that will proliferate through the civilization, and we could have a golden age. I mean, that's the hope, right? It
does seem like whatever the outcomes, however it gets disrupted, like high agency people are at odds with just a ossified bureaucratic system.
Totally. Yeah, it's Ayn Rand kind of got it right. It's like there's the producers and the takers, and totally right as far as I can tell. You see that everywhere. There's like a very, I think it's not so much like a genetic thing, right? I don't think like people are just genetically like they're a producer or a taker. I just think you have systems where when it makes sense to be a taker, like way more people are going to choose that option.
Right. Yeah, and I think even right now, an example comes to mind is the very distinct ethos of between the U.S. and, let's say, Europe and the U.K.
Yeah.
There, it's like, you can't say that, you can't do that, you can't build that, you can't. It's just regulation and asphyxiating, bureaucracy at every layer.
Yeah.
And in the U.S. we have a lot of that, but thankfully we still retain a strong spirit of, you can just do things, as the meme goes. You can just do.
This is the land of you can just do things, right? Like that's probably, I shouldn't say this, but like Europe, I mean, if the people still left in Europe are the ones who like they've had like 500 years to get to.
Right. Yeah, that's true. Yes.
Right.
That's so true.
So like, and it's gotten easier and easier. It used to be like you had to take a boat and risk your life, and now it's like it's a flight. So if your family hasn't made it here by now, they're gonna have a hard time.
No, it's true.
Getting out of that curve. They only had California, like the edge, like the frontier. Yes. It's like there's all the people who, a lot of the people came from somewhere else. It's like this is like the land of ambition, and like you can just do things.
Yes.
And so it's hard to see how Europe gets out of the current mess with the population.
Yes. Yeah. Centuries long brain drain, adventure brain drain from.
Brain drains are brutal. Yeah. They're brutal. Yeah, like I started some people I know from Venezuela, like where they had the, socialism take root there. And the smart people leave and they don't come back. It's very difficult to reverse it, right? I don't know of any case where people have been able, populations have been able to reverse a brain drain. So yeah, it's brutal, and it's crazy. Going on for, pretty bad in Europe, combined with the asphyxiating regulations.
Yeah. Why would you even go back?
Well, and the market cap for all companies globally went from 60 to 63%. American companies that just this year grew from 60. I had no idea that we made up that much of the global market cap.
Wow.
But it's insane. It's crazy.
Yeah. And then I think someone that posted about this on X the other day, like if you look at the $1 trillion companies, like all of them are founded in California,
right.
like
exactly.
basically in the Bay Area. Yeah. Yeah. So there's something about the concentration of talent that seems to be important.
How is building synthesis here in California, particularly during the recent sort of cultural realignment, vibe shift, whatever you want to call it,
a cultural revolution?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. As an outsider, I'm sort of thinking of what I see, the battles with, like, there was the whole standardized testing is bad, unequal outcomes are bad. It seems like a fundamental principle of education is that inequality is sort of a given. Inequality not in a bad way. Yeah. Just mean like some kids are going to be more skilled than others. Some kids are better at sports. Some kids are this. Did you get pushback because you were you were just sort of building along reality versus?
Yeah. We're undiplomatic way to put it is like we're unapologetically elitist. All right. Like we want the kids who are not every kid is going to enjoy, playing like strategy games. Maybe it's like 10%, maybe it's 20%. We're not in the position of like judging who is elite and who isn't, but we want to make something for the kids that we think are most likely to have a high impact. 'Cause we think those kids are underserved by the system because there is this ideology of equality or equity, right? And that's everywhere in education. It's like, if you know the David Foster Wallace story about like the fish, the two fish passing, and one fish says, "How's the water?" and the other one's like, "What the hell is water?" That's woke ideology in education. It's water. People don't even realize that it's like something that's off-putting to a lot of people. They just equity, the kind of transgender ideology, like all of that stuff is just like the air that they breathe in education. It's everywhere. And so we kind of made this conscious decision initially. So there's the other side, the right-wing way of looking at it, which is, it's all kind of genetics and it's IQ, and you can boil people's value down to like their placement on a scalar. I think reality is way more interesting 100%. Than that, right? I think it's I think IQ basically compresses this high dimensional thing into a scalar, which is a huge, just logical mistake. And so we're not like that either. And that, by the way, is like a major factor in how our system is designed, even though it doesn't work like this anymore. It's kind of our education system in America is designed to separate the wheat from the chaff, right? And so it's not designed to educate people necessarily. It's designed to pick who goes to Harvard and becomes the elite, right? Harvard's not trying to turn you into something. It's trying to like take that thin slice of the population. And our whole education system is kind of like that, with like the standardized tests and the cutoffs at each grade level. You're just trying to figure out who has the natural ability. It's kind of abandoning the idea that you can even teach at all. And it's just purely focused on like what you come in with. And so we didn't want to go that route either. We just wanted to make something where we'll take anybody. But we're going to try to just create more runway for the brightest kids. Like that's our allegiance. So when we build the games, we're trying to make games that are challenging, and they're going to appeal to the kids who are like we were when we were kids, who want something that's a challenge and that's smarter. We're not going to try to build Fortnite or like a shooter or something like that. That's just not what we're going to do. There's plenty of that stuff out there. Exactly. And it's fine too. My kids play that. I don't hate it or anything. It's just not what we're doing. And then on the tutor, same thing, right? Like we're gonna start it at kindergarten. We're gonna teach you though. We're gonna try to get everybody, of whatever genetic ability you have, we're going to try to get you to where the top 1% of genetic ability is now. And then we're going to keep extending the runway and just keep pushing, right? And we don't care about equality or anything like that. We're just going to make something that we think is really great and give it to everybody. And we're going to be totally fine if this thing helps the top 10% of kids more than it helps the bottom 10%. We don't really care. We just think about it like, let's raise all the boats and, kind of let the chips fall.
Right.
And I just think like there's a kind of focus on like IQ. Like there's this idea that smart is like this single dimensional thing, when I think the reality is there's, to succeed, you need some kind of combination of your interests and abilities. And there are more interests and more abilities than we can even imagine. It's much more complex than we think.
Right. I think, one of the first conversations you and I had was all around this. And I think our conclusion was like, it was sort of tongue in cheek, but like, sure sign of low IQ is obsession with IQ. It's compressing people into a single dimension. It's sort of like the horseshoe theory of like the transhuman eugenicist technologists and the esoteric right wingers, where they just try to compress people into a single dimension.
Yes,
it's fun. It's almost like actually kind of bureaucratic, where they're just like, if I could just measure you into a single digit, single number, single value, then I could just plug you right into
that's the one place where IQ is valuable. So one of the arguments people give me is like, well, you can tell like some people are smarter than others, right? And I'm like, yeah, exactly. I can tell. I don't need the IQ test to be able to tell that. So the one place where the IQ is like maybe a valuable thing is you're in the military and you've got to bring in 100,000 people in a year, and you don't have time to look at them in any way other than I'm just going to give them this
measure
test.
Them, right.
Even that doesn't work out that well. There's a famous longitudinal IQ study, the Terman IQ study is a guy at Stanford who wanted to study young geniuses. So he IQ tested like thousands of kids, took the top, a couple hundred, or I forget what the percentage was, and studied them over a lifetime. And he, in his group that he said was gifted geniuses, he missed two distinct Nobel Prize in physics winners. Two separate Nobel Prize in physics did not make the cutoff. They would have if instead of looking at IQ, he would have looked at just their math score on like the math and shape rotator part of IQ. But that's kind of the point, right? Is that that's what you would want to look for if you're looking for genius. You're looking for genius in some particular way. There's not this just like global type of genius. And, you can subdivide it into like verbal and math, but you can continue to subdivide it further and further. And it's kind of hard to predict. There's more variation than we can even imagine, and you can't really measure it. You can measure it in specific things, just like if you're trying to look for NBA players, you want to look for people who are particularly tall. You can do that if you know what the game is in advance and you know what to test for. But that, I think it's like limited value outside of that.
Yeah.
Not surprising we brought that up for the first time.
Yeah, exactly. Like some military guys have like this dictum, or it's something like mission dictates the equipment or mission dictates. And so it's like,
That's a good way to put it.
The game, if your game is, you can have a high IQ guy, but if the game is, go hunting, like,
yes,
that's literally irrelevant.
Yeah, and there's a lot more to life and to the fabric of society than just the highest percentile of IQ, where you take people who are like doing embryo selection or whatever, all the stuff that we are now being able to do, and be like, hey, we could just select for high IQ across the world. Like, please don't.
Do embryo selection is to choosing your mate.
Yeah, there we go. The OG selection.
Yes. Otherwise, you don't know what you're selecting for.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
That's right.
You don't know if you should select for IQ. There's all these things too that are super interesting. Where like if you take like sort of like programming ability, which is more narrow than IQ, like it's one of those things where maybe it's really valuable if you're in the top 1% or 0.1%, but maybe it's not valuable. Maybe it's even a negative if you're in 90th percentile, between 90th and 99th. So it's that kind of like playing God with embryo. I'm not like against it on moral grounds. I'm against it on epistemological grounds. Like I don't think it's going to work, because it's not like breeding racehorses where you're like, I want a racehorse I don't want this thing to be fast on like a quarter
around
mile,
the circle,
right?
yeah.
Life is so much more dynamic than that. So you can't choose that way.
So kind of related to all this, you're obviously focused on children education for kids. Is there a future where you think you expand to, or there's a version of this that exists for adults? And it could be adults like professionals, like in their 30s and 40s, but maybe like 18 and 20 years. I'm thinking, I guess to fully reveal the background of my question, a lot about this conversation I've been thinking about. One of my favorite books is Ender's Game, and it's the battle school, and it's like this dynamic. This great book, also dark book in other ways, but the dynamic learning environment where they're constantly toiling with reality and getting that feedback loop. Great for kids. Seems like a lot of adults could also use this in some shape or form. What are your thoughts there?
Kind of agnostic on the age of people who use our products. So we have adults who are using the tutor to learn math, and there's definitely, we get a lot of comments from people who see the games that are like, oh, can we use this like at our company? As far as like a market and like strategy for the company, it makes sense to start with kids, because there is like this trunk of like the tree of knowledge where you have, like, if you can build a superhuman tutor for math, that is an enormous market. Whereas if you start going to adults, because life is so interesting and dynamic, if you're trying to train them for something, you're trying to train like, plumbers, for example, if you take that as an example, or like electrical engineers, let's say, then it's like less than 1% of the population is going to need that or be interested in it, right? So if I wouldn't have done this before we kind of, the technological factors kind of came into play to make the superhuman tutor possible, but it makes it possible to take a direct attack on something that is like super broad, like there's a very, very broad market, and it's not saturated. There's like, their competitors aren't there because of this like recent technological change, right? Mm-hmm. So I think there's a long way to go in just teaching the basics of like math, physics, engineering, but the more advanced you go up the tree, the more narrow the market becomes. And so we have this opportunity to start broad. So we'll start there and see where it takes us. And, maybe other people will come along and do adult training, better than we would do. We don't need to do everything in the whole world. I think I've always been interested in early education too, because I think it's just like a ship that's just leaving harbor. If you can change the bearing a little bit, that has huge impacts down the road.
Yeah. That makes sense. I guess some of those tools that exist for adults, kids too, but adults would be just straight up video games. Like Elon plays Polytopia, Factorio came out and people were geeking about it, and play some Civilization every once in a while.
Factorio is great. Exactly. Yeah, Civilization's great.
Stay sharp on your strategy and like ability to command large groups of people dynamically across space, battle space.
Yeah. I think with my kids, the way I approach it is, try to play a lot of different games. I don't, if I watch them play Fortnite, for example, thumb speed is really important. I don't think thumb speed like translates directly to anything that's super important that we care about. And so I think that aspect of learning a new game and kind of figuring out how it works is is important. So I try to get them to switch up the games they play,
Yeah.
and play a lot more of the strategy games, more of the games that are not, so not shooters or like racing games,
Right.
like those are fine. But I actually think there's a real educational value in something like Factorio or any of the kind of civilization builder games too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think one thing about the strategy games, like it is important to have the strategy and to be able to manage resources and all that. One thing, and we were talking about this with someone in regards to the incoming Trump administration, like it's one thing to know what to do. It's another thing also to be able to get people to do those things.
Yeah,
and that's a piece you're used to video games. I think that's one negative in video games, especially strategy games, is always everyone does what you tell them to do, and it just happens. Like you can point and click. It's strategy games.
That'd be great.
And in reality, there's all these people, and you could tell them what to do explicitly. They might not do it because they're having a bad day or because they, don't agree or like whatever it is. Exactly.
This exactly gets at like what we're trying to do with synthesis games is something that's like, so it's like in between like a Fortnite and like a Factorio, right? So it's something that you do together, but has the strategic element of it, because that is kind of like the missing skill that is sort of, it's one of those things that's like on the core. Can you make these complex decisions with other people where they all have their own ideas and their own view on reality, right? And can you kind of negotiate that with other people? Like I would say that's one of the things that Elon is like his superpower, right? Or Steve Jobs as well. Like you read the biographies of these guys, they're not always right? They do usually have strong opinions, but they've also got really smart people who have a view on a particular area and who are thinking about it, all day. And they have to be able to negotiate those kind of decisions. And it's totally a skill. It's a skill I did not have until, not at all until I was probably like 30, which is like way too late, right? Way too late. And I think, when you're in school, it's just, you don't get that kind of practice. If you have a group project, it's just like one kid just does it, whoever just cares about it, right? And so I think games are really good in that way, like where you care about winning the game. It has its own like stakes to it. And so emotions will run high. And that's a huge part of like growing up and being more successful. It's like dealing with it when people are emotional about the decisions as well. So I think there's all that kind of complexity that's hard to reduce, but I think video games give you like, can give you some great experience.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems like, so Josh and I have been friends for over a decade now. We've met in college, we were roommates, and I've done all sorts of cool things since then. But we've both reflected on this, like that even if school is a game, a kind of game, there were people at our school, and we went to it's non-federally funded, a great school, small, 120 students when we were there. Very much Oxford tutorial, like super small classes, great across pretty much every domain. But even there were people who were just really good at that game. Yeah. And then you take them out of that game and then they just didn't know what to do.
Oh, yeah.
And there were people that were kind of okay at that game.
Or bad at that game.
And then just crushed the real estate game or investing game like right away, right after college. And then people who were good at that game and then left and had to readjust to be good at another game. And they were good at both games, but there was little translation in terms of just direct skill set.
Yeah. I love this topic.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And
go ahead.
No, it's something that I think about a lot. And we think about a lot just in terms of like Josh and I would say like kind of a way to describe ourselves and is we're always picking up new games and wanting to like learn new stuff. But even as I think of my kids is making sure that they're playing different games at the same time. It sounds kind of like that's what you're saying. So they don't get just good at one single game, and then very easily you can fall in this trap of saying like, "Wow, look at how good that kid is because he's so good at this game." Well, maybe it's just one game. Like, what about 50 games? What about ability to switch between games?
Yeah. And I think with some of those people, and a lot of like college or schooling scenarios, it can be an agency issue where someone gets really good at the game of, I'll do whatever the syllabus says. I'll fill in this box all the way, and that's the game that I play, and then can get frustrated outside of that environment.
Absolutely, yeah. I love this topic because favorite kind of example of this is like in football, like college football quarterback to NFL, and it's like you can be the most successful college quarterback. It's the same game, right? It's just one level below, and then the translation to success at the next level is way lower than you would expect, right? These sports teams are always wasting, like $50 million, $100 million, and they have like about as good as you could ever get way to predict if someone's going to succeed. It's like you played the game at the next highest level, which is an extremely selective level, and it still doesn't work out. I also like, I'm a big like soccer fan, and I always notice this, like, there was a guy so Leo Messi, the best player ever lived. There's a guy at Barcelona, same club, that went through the youth system, same system, broke all of his records. They're thinking this guy is going to be way better. And then when he plays at the highest level, he washes out and he's gone in like 2 years, right? It's just crazy. So that shows you, I think, that it's a bit of a fool's errand to think that you're ever going to get some system that predicts success in even a slightly different game, which is why I get back to, like, there's something our head of content, the guy who runs the tutor synthesis tutor project for us says is, like, you learn what is invariant by studying all the variations, right? So that's when you get back to, if you play a lot of different games, your mind will extract what does not vary between the games and figure out what's important. These are kind of the things in sports people talk about as being like the fundamentals. If you want to train for like soccer or basketball or something like that, you want to play all kinds of variations. You want to play like 1-on-1, you want to play 2-on-2, 5-on-5, shorter court, all kinds of variations of games, and practicing a bunch of different skills, shooting from a bunch of different places in a bunch of different situations, because your mind will then extract through all those variations what is invariant. And so I think that's, if you think about like raising kids, that's why it's important to play a lot of different, video games. Video games aren't going to map to reality fully either, but you'll get something from playing the different video games, from being involved in different activities, and from reading widely. You'll kind of extract these things that are the invariants, like the fundamentals.
Yeah.
Nothing's going to be a guarantee of success, because that's what it means to live in a dynamic society. Sure. There's too many different games to totally prepare for it, but you can build skills and study a bunch of different things so that I believe you can improve your ability to succeed at games as such, right? Same way, if you play a bunch of sports, you could play basketball and football and all those kind of things. Someone invents some new game, you play lacrosse. Sure. It's kind of it's not you're not going to be as good as someone who totally focused on lacrosse maybe, but some of it's going to transfer. Always something will transfer.
One part of this though seems to be that you want the parents, at least in one case the dad, especially if you have boys, to be a game playing dad, right? Because you can't just like wind the clock and set your kids to like learn all these games and here's synthesis tutor, and you're just sort of a static paterfamilias that doesn't play any games, and you see this. I think I've seen this with families and friends of ours who the dad, and it doesn't have to be physical, but the dad is always learning or doing or again transacting with reality in some shape or form, and then the kids are doing that in their own ways at soccer camp or whatever, but they can also come under the dad to see him learning new games. Like, dad's picking up this new skill, dad's picking up this new obsession, hobby, whatever. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think like being an example is like the best, that's the best education you can give your kids for sure. That's a challenging thing about being a dad is like, I think I find, at least, what I get most frustrated with my boys, it's when I see them doing something that I know is like within me, right?
Sure.
So yeah, I think that's I just think what we're doing with like education is a I think it's important, but it's a thin layer on top of parenting, and I think the bulk of parenting is making your kids feel loved and supported, and then being a good example. I think there's a lot of things I try to teach my kids, but just very clearly they learn better from example. So
I'm seeing you do it. Right.
Yeah, exactly. So
how involved do you think the father should be, and at what times and phases? Is there any difference there? Like, how do you think about that?
I don't know. I'll probably, I think probably maybe everybody who answers this question will just answer it in the way that they actually did it. Right? I think it'd be painful to admit that you did it wrong. I think, there's some good, psychology here, research on this kind of thing where your dad is like the one that's like tickling the kids or wrestling with them or throwing them up in the air and being like a little bit dangerous and fun. When kids want to have fun, they like run to their dad, and then the mom is like the supportive one. And I think, for my boys at least, like they were way more, the mom was more central, at least from like 0 to 4. I think I almost think like, I was like a side character
100%.
for the boys when they're 0 to 4. And like I loved them and I played with them and wrestled them. I think that stuff is really important, but I also don't know how much of a difference it would have made if I was just like totally out of the picture during those years.
True Spartan status.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, one thing people ask me about, like when they ask me about synthesis, we usually start like say like age 7 or so for the game, 7 or 8. And they're like, oh, do you have anything? Like my son's 2, and I'm like, even the Spartans, the boys didn't join the Agoge until they were 7, right? They were Spartans were mama's boys until age 7, right? So just take it easy.
It's okay.
Like I think that's fine. Like my
son was born last night. What do I put it?
yeah, exactly.
Synthesis for.
There are these. I think it's a hard thing for the Type A people to realize, is like there just are these developmental stages, and I think when you're young you want like a really I believe in like the attachment parenting thing. Like I just think like total unconditional love and like safety particularly from mom is like just critical at that age. Our kids like slept in bed with their mom till they were 4 at least, and I think that's just fine, right? Like I think that's a really good thing to do. As they get older, then I think, at least I've seen, like they gravitate more toward me and they want to be more adventurous. They're more into the sports and stuff like that, and it's still close to their mom, but just different. So I think it just helps when you're dad and you like being like playful and like doing things with them. Aside, a lot of it is just you do what your biology indicates that you should do. Just like follow whatever biology tells you should do. It's just, you don't really need to fight it. You naturally, I think, want to play games with them and want them to be in sports, and you naturally, I think, you want to be hard on them a little bit. I think there are a lot of dads that regret that later on. Like my dad's told me that he's like, I was like, I was really hard on you boys. Like, I don't remember that. Like, I don't think so. Like, he like expects things from you. But that's your mom's kind of roles, like unconditional love. Like, you can do anything. I think your dad is more like, I believe in you, but that's not good enough. Yeah. Right? I think there's a reason. I just think all these things kind of fit together, right? So I think both of those are important. I think it's okay to be like a little bit harsher with the kids once they get a little bit older. I found that they love it. So I coached my son's soccer team for a little bit, and I was like, the kids were like, I think 8, and I'd be like yelling at them at the practices and stuff, and their parents would come up to me after and be like, thank you. Like he just loves like your practices. I'm like, I feel like I'm kind of harsh, and it wasn't anything I was doing on purpose. It was just because like I'm like, hey, come on, like focus, man. I get frustrated with them, but the little boys seem to love it in particular. Like they seem to like really appreciate having like the high standards.
At least when I was that age, like our favorite soccer coach we ever had was the one who was hard on us. Yeah. Who like made us feel like we were in a Disney movie, like being the underdog team, like coming up, and we won, which was really the most important thing for us.
So the Latin teacher we had in college, he's a great, just incredible mind of an educator. Also runs an ed tech company to teach kids Latin, which is awesome.
What's the company?
Picta Dicta. Not venture back, bootstrapped.
I might follow him. Yeah.
He's just spilled wisdom and from the ancients and most everything he says. But one of the things he told me once, we were talking about education games and the difference between kids with their moms versus kids with their dads. He said something like the moms see women. We were talking about like the structure of a school where it's mostly women teaching boys versus boys like going out with their dads, or being segregated. And he said basically for him it boils down to like women seeing excellence as the absence of mistake versus men seeing excellence as the presence of virtue. And not that women don't care about virtue, but broadly speaking, generally speaking, he was sort of seeing like in his decades of teaching, like the women, the moms will look for like, did you do it exactly as is prescribed? Did you check in the boxes?
Right.
And there's utility for that. But then particularly for boys, and what men will push them for is, do you go beyond that? Like, did you take massive risks? Did you conquer that hill? Was it done in the perfectly clean way? Maybe not, but like, did you achieve that?
Yeah.
I think it seems to me like so much of racing boys has to do, and or girls, is adapting to playing that game with them. Is like how do they respond to these different inputs, given what they're wired for.
Men respect daring. It's like
so I think with my son. So my son is young. He just turned 5.5, but there's always been like, I've noticed this twice in his short life. He gets this look when he's either done something that he knows he just like crossed a little mini Rubicon of sorts in a good way, like something that he didn't think he could do and he did it. And he gets the same look when he's seen me do something. Like if I did a weightlifting competition, and then he's not just like on TV, guys somewhere in the ether compete. It's like dad just went and did it, and then he gets this look of like sort of like somber, like he's like, we can just do this, and you
can just do things.
Yeah, you can just do things, and it's been very interesting watching like actual physical manifestation of him, sort of his brain, his soul, whatever, like rewiring around, suddenly glancing and taking a glimpse of that reality. That he can just do things. My daughter, she's younger, but I have 2 daughters, but the older one of my daughters, she just kind of like waltzes through life. Those things don't kind of imprint on her as much as they do my son. Or he like, there's clearly a moment he takes a beat, he pays attention, gets written into his mind or his soul, and then he moves forward.
That's great. I think it's interesting to have, once you have a couple kids, you kind of get like a good sense of what you can do with parenting and what's just there. You can't, it's hard to change who they are fundamentally.
Yes.
They have their own personalities that are hard to change.
Yep.
Yeah.
How are you thinking about end game for your kids in terms of like launching them? Like when does that take place? Are you going to encourage them to go to college? What does that look like?
Yeah, I think so. I think I think the plan A is like build a successful company and training my successor or successors. So I think about it that way. I always have. So yeah, I think my 10-year-old now like helps me out with like some of the game design, and like it's good. I'm constantly like asking him, for his opinions on the product and trying to get him to like think about the product and the business. I've always done that kind of thing with him. So yeah, I think that's as far as college, I probably they'll go to college. I guess I think there's, I don't know. I guess it depends on where they go. It seems like kind of if everybody goes to college, you kind of have to go. So you don't have to treat it as like anything to take seriously with the classes or anything like that. But where'd you guys meet?
College.
Yeah,
that's right.
My COO in college.
Right.
Like it's
right.
If you don't do that, you need some kind of replacement, and I don't know, it may not be. I don't know where you go and can hopefully the costs will come down in the meantime back to Earth, but I don't know where you can go and just meet like-minded people and kind of goof off for a little bit.
Sure.
Maybe that's valuable. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think the alternative, like you move right to San Francisco, right to a city or something, and go to work, or
join a startup right away, or something.
Yeah, maybe do like a missions trip or something like that. Maybe you could make there's these like developmental windows, and it's like it's that's where people seem to make their lifelong friends. So you probably, you could skip out on that and like, get ahead a little bit in your career or something. But I used to think kind of more like that, but I think as I get older, it's like, what's the rush? Take that time and explore a little bit. It's okay. So my kind of plan A would be like they go and they drop out, right? Because I think you probably make your friends in the first year or two. And I felt like my later years in college were a waste. I like the intro level classes, though. I think probably by the time my kids go to college, we'll have all those covered on the tutor. Like I really enjoyed like communications and economics and doing like the 101s of everything. I kind of got fooled. Like I took some of the 201 classes and I was like, oh wait, there's nothing to this field. It's just a 101, right? Like, and there's a lot of fields like that. But I think learning the kind of 101s and like anthropology and like all these different kind of things would be helpful. But I don't think you need college for that. I think, dubious value.
Just go do things.
Just go do things. Yeah.
Yes. So if people want to learn more about synthesis or actually use it, where should they go and when should they start their kids? Not when they're 2 months old.
You people always DM me that. And I'm like, what should I do? I'm like, well, he's 4 years old. Yeah. Okay. So it's like pick him up by his hind legs and then push him around like he's a vacuum cleaner. Throw him up in the air really high. Like, that kind of thing. But yeah, so synthesis.com is the website, and the tutor, you can get your kids on it as young as 5. My 5-year-old daughter does it; she loves it. It's not a rush if your kids are eager to learn and you're eager to go down this path, and that's great. I think they can wait until age 7, and it's they're not going to lose a ton. I think that's fine. And then the games start at age 8 now. So if you're 8, you can join the community. It's smart kids from all over the world playing these complex games, learning how to solve problems and learning how to communicate.
Awesome.
And I'm on X, Chrisman Frank, at Chrisman Frank.
Yeah, we'll link to all of that in the description. So.
Yeah. Opinions do not represent the opinions of my employer. So it's just caveat.
That's right.
But they are sweet. Truth bombs.
May have lost as many customers from my ex posting.
But it brought us here.
Yeah,
so.
Great trade. I used to, people would try to push me more on that, and I feel like as we keep going, I was like, you only have one life. Like I'm just gonna say what I feel like saying. Like if people find me like so off-putting that they're like not gonna use the products, then like that's fine. But
talk about it.
I'm like such a monster that that you just can't use the products, and I made a lot of friends. So
yes, absolutely. Talk about games. Like life is the one game where you really just have one life.
Yeah.
No restarts, no response.
As far as we know.
Exactly.
I saw someone saying Elon is like, it's definitely this is not his first time through the simulation.
I saw that. Yeah, sounds a funny thing. But
as far as we know.
Go as hard as you can because you only get one life and one shot. So good stuff, man. Thanks for coming on the pod.
Yeah. Thanks for doing it.
Yeah, man. Good having you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the New Founding Podcast. New Founding has become a rallying point for founders and investors who are taking serious bets in the face of a stagnant business culture. Our venture fund backs founders building dynamic companies, powered by American ideals and a positive national vision. These are the kinds of founders that embody the optimism and competence of the people who come on this podcast. If you're interested in investing in our fund, check out newfounding.com/venture fund and follow the link to apply.